Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Secret Spice of Life. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.
Welcome to some shit that's considered legendary.
Hey, what is going on, you variety-loving people? Hope you're ready to add some spice to your day. Welcome back to Secret Spice of Life. We're your hosts. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Jordan.
And if you're new to the podcast, welcome. Well, we have a pretty interesting guest here with us today. He is the play-by-play voice for the Pittsburgh Penguins on AT&T Sportsnet Pittsburgh. Steve Mears, what's going on, man?
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So how have you been spending your time in quarantine?
It's probably like everybody else, doing the usual Netflix shows, trying to stay mentally and physically sharp in some other ways, and get outside every once in a while, especially on a beautiful day like this today, and keeping an eye on sports and where things are at with the potential of hopefully getting back to complete the season, and keeping an eye on the news and everything. So it's been, I don't want to say fun. We'd much rather be doing hockey right now, but I'm trying to make the most of it. And it does give you the opportunity to do some things that you otherwise wouldn't do because you have so much time. We always, especially during our hockey season, we're always like, oh, I wish I had more time to do this, this, and this. And now we have it. So I think you should take advantage of it.
So, what are things that you do to stay sharp as an announcer? I mean, you guys were getting ready to go into the playoffs. So, just stopping the season like this has to be kind of weird. What are some things that you do to stay in touch with the game besides just looking at the news online?
Yeah, looking at the hockey news, the sports news, watching NHL Network, and just making sure I'm aware of what's going on. What are the players doing? How are they spending their quarantine? Keeping up with some of the stories that are still out there, because there are still a lot of good stories, a lot of good coverage. So many classic games that are airing on AT&T Sportsnet and NHL Network. I've loved that, not just for hockey, but with all the sports. So that's really been fun to go back. And of course, the Penguins have so many great memories and winning 5 Stanley Cups. So it's nice to go back and relive those memories. But that's pretty much it. And just trying to stay mentally and physically active in general. I think that's most important for just a healthy lifestyle. So I'm doing that. And then eventually, if there is some type of a restart, and what they've said is going to be like a 2 to 3 week training camp, if that happens, big if. But if it does, then I'll start to really dive into the notes, and who knows, maybe even do some mock games and just try to sharpen those skills once again, because this is very out of the ordinary. Normally, we would have done those final 10 regular season games and at least one round of the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And now in this case, we left Columbus. We were about to do a game that was going to have no fans. And then all of a sudden, we're flying home on what was supposed to be a game day. And obviously haven't been back around the hockey team since. So it's just a day-by-day thing, and just trying to stay abreast of what's going on around the hockey world.
Have you had any contact with players or coaches since that last game, or no? You haven't talked to anybody?
Not personally, but the team has done a great job of making them available, and they've done various conference calls and Zoom calls just like this. Mm-hmm. Mike Sullivan has done it, Jim Rutherford, and a lot of the players. And it's cool to catch up with the players and see what they're doing and how the family life is. A couple of players have quarantined together. Zach Aston-Reese was at Brian Rust's house with his wife, and there have been a couple of other players who have either traveled back home, wherever that may be, Canada or Europe or wherever, and some have stayed here in Pittsburgh. So aside from maybe bumping into a couple of them at the grocery store here and there, I have not had that direct contact with them, but I imagine they're doing the same thing. And especially in their case, they're trying to stay in good shape, because if this thing gets fired up again, you're going to be quickly left behind if you haven't been doing the normal workouts. And I know the strength and conditioning staff on the Penguins, right from the day we left Columbus, they made it a point to send out the game plan for what to do. And the message basically was, the longer this goes, the more important that protocol and that workout regimen is going to be. So, that's that's been a big part of it. I know for them is just trying to stay physically active and doing so without access to skating, which is very strange for them. And even without access to a regular gym. So just like everybody else, trying to stay in shape at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. And I see like a lot of other like TV personalities or people who do play-by-play or the radio personalities even, they're using like their social media to kind of talk on like topics throughout sports. Have you been doing that yourself, like using either like Twitter or Instagram to like just post like something real quick just to talk about a small topic?
Yeah, definitely Twitter. And I thought I'd just go back and I decided I would just tweet out some of the great goals in Penguin history because there are so many of them. It's unbelievable. You could go by style points. You could go by the magnitude of the goal, whether it was a big overtime goal in a playoff Stanley Cup run or the first goal in the career of Mario Lemieux or Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin. There are so many memorable goals. I could send one a day for the rest of the calendar year. And they're just, I don't know how many I ended up doing, and I'm still kind of throwing them out there. But it's another way, kind of like what I was talking about with the classic games, of just reliving these amazing moments. And it's all in one thread. Anybody can go there. And if you're a big Penguin fan, just go on and scroll down and you can watch. You have the great calls, usually of Mike Lang. And you have it's also some moments that we kind of forgot about. There's like some games that get forgotten. 2008 comes to mind when they went all the way to the Stanley Cup final and lost to Detroit. But there were some incredible moments in that run against the Flyers, and big Peter Sikora goal in the Stanley Cup final in Game 5 to keep their season and their hopes alive. That year kind of gets forgotten because it wasn't a cup year, but it was the arrival of the Crosby and Malkin Penguins. And there are a couple other ones that were just great moments, like for my childhood when I was growing up, that just to be able to go back and look at some of those in a modern fashion. And for some younger fans, maybe they're unaware that Darius Kasparaitis scored a big Game 7 overtime goal in 2001 to win a series against Buffalo or whatever the series might be, some of the 90s Cup wins and some of the big games there. So that's been a fun thing just on Twitter going back as a Penguin fan, lifelong Penguin fan. It's just there's so many fun memories, and you can I transports me right back to exactly where I was when that shot was taken, when that puck hit the back of the net, and what I thought and felt, and the sound of the crowd and the sound of the announcer, whoever it was. That's always fun to relive some of those, because those are pivotal moments in your life as a sports fan and a Penguin fan.
Yeah, I think people just tend to forget like things when the Penguins don't win the Stanley Cup. People are like, oh, just let's forget about that season and put it behind us. But like you said, the Kasparaitis goal, what was that in like 2001 that he scored that?
Yeah, 2001. The team only has in 50 plus years, they've only had 2 Game 7 overtime wins. Chris Kunitz in 2017 in Game 7 against the Senators, double overtime to go to the final. And the other one was that series in 2001. That was the Lemieux comeback year. And Darius Kasparaitis, who had hardly scored at all in his playoff career in that season, obviously not a big goal scorer. He takes that pass and beats Dominik Hasek, one of the greatest goalies of all time, and scores a Game 7 overtime goal. And I was in college, and I remember just the feeling that being so nervous because it's one shot. It's one shot, and your season is either advancing to the conference final or it is over. So it doesn't get any more dramatic than that. And the Penguins have a couple of those. And they've been on the other side, too. They have a Game 7 overtime loss in 1993, which I hate to even bring up, but that's about as painful as it gets. And that was against the Islanders. So you have both ends of the spectrum, but that's just the ebb and flow of being a devoted fan of any team, especially one that has so many highs and lows and tribulations that the Penguins franchise has had over the years. But that one really stands out just because it was the Lemieux comeback year. It was an unlikely hero, and it was Game 7 overtime. And Kasparaitis also had a great celebration. He did the dive. He did kind of like a penguin kick with his feet. And it was just it was an awesome moment in a year where all they did was go to the conference final. They didn't win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, that's crazy. People seem to think that, oh, like this team was so bad for so many years before we got Crosby and Malkin and Fleury and Jordan Staal, like 4 years in a row getting all that talent, and then how quickly they put it back together and went right to the Cup finals.
Yeah, that's and that wasn't even that much suffering when you
Yeah.
think about the long run of playoffs they had leading up to 2002 when they missed. And then, a few down years, and they were ugly. There's no question. But relatively speaking, that was not that bad. And you hear the stories about the 80s and the bankruptcies, some of the troubles in the 90s, and some lean years even in the late 60s and 70s where the team didn't have as much on-ice success. They were an expansion team, of course, and we're just trying to get going, and it didn't quite happen until the arrival of Lemieux. And even that took 7 years before the Cup finally arrived for the first time. So it's an incredible story, the franchise. There aren't many like it when you have multiple times they're on the brink of extinction with the bankruptcies and the financial troubles, and the team's going to move to Kansas City and they're going to lose their arena, and they can't get a new arena. And then all of a sudden, almost magically, here's Lemieux who arrives. This knight in shining armor arrives to save the day. And then obviously the Crosby lottery in 2005, which was literally a lottery ball, a ping pong ball that bounced the Penguins' way. And yes, they were a bad team the year before, but the odds weren't immensely in their favor to get that lottery win, but they did, and it saved the franchise. Ultimately got the new arena built, and now they're one of the most successful franchises in all sports.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, you're obviously talking with like a lot of passion. Like we know you're like a Pittsburgh guy. You grew up in like Murraysville and stuff like that. So I know you did play-by-play a little bit for the Islanders for a while. And was that weird kind of doing that for a different team?
It was only weird when I came to Pittsburgh. That was the one. I actually didn't really like it that much because I just found it to be a distraction. It was so bizarre and surreal because I'm doing a game in the Igloo. I'm in the press box, the same press box that I used to sit in the stands and dream of being in one day as a kid. I was walking around the locker room, and I'm just thinking, like, this is insane that I'm here in this building. So when I would go back to the Igloo as the radio voice of the Islanders, that was very strange. Otherwise, it was just a dream and an enjoyable job and a very good first NHL job for a long-time franchise in the league in a big media market, obviously. So that, other than that, I mean, yeah, it was. I just had such a great time. I was in my mid-20s and just having a great time doing that job. But it was strange when I would go back to the Igloo. And you do have to kind of remind yourself, okay, remember the team that signs your paycheck. You're not a Penguin fan anymore. And also it would be like family members would be there. They would want tickets, and they would be in the crowd, and they want to meet after the game. So there's a lot going on. Yeah. But one thing I do really remember was that first time I was on the Islanders plane. And obviously I'd circled that date. That first game in Pittsburgh was going to be a big one for me when I was starting out in my quote-unquote rookie year. And I just remember flying in and looking out the window on the Islanders plane and seeing the triangle of Pittsburgh, the confluence of the three rivers, the buildings downtown, Point State Park. Mm-hmm. And that was like an eye-opening, surreal moment, just to think like, okay, I've arrived now. That was well into my first NHL year. It wasn't like that was my first trip or my first game. Mm-hmm. But to be able to land in Pittsburgh and have that image of the city and then pulling up eventually to the Igloo and walking in for the morning skate. And that was like my arrival, like I had made it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And did you have like, when you were going to that game in Pittsburgh, like when you were announcing it, did you ever like catch yourself like cheering for like Pittsburgh or anything like that?
A little. Well, it didn't matter then because the Islanders were so bad and the Penguins were so good that every time we went to the Igloo, we would get destroyed by the Penguins because the Islanders were a young rebuilding team and the Penguins were a young team, but they were on the rise. They had a young Crosby, a young Malkin. Mm-hmm. So at this time, it's like 2007, 2008, 2009, and they're starting to really ramp it up and become one of the powerhouse teams in the league. So it was like men against boys when the Islanders would come in with our lowly team that had some aging veterans and some young kids that probably didn't deserve to be in the NHL or in other circumstances wouldn't have been. They were maybe just called up from the AHL. So it didn't really matter. It was one-sided. But yeah, every time when I would see the Penguins, and mostly because the team was getting going again, that was the encouraging sign for me. And maybe within I would have a little fist pump internally. But the reality was, going back to that reminder, who signs your paycheck? And it was the Islanders. And also, when you work for one of these teams, no matter who it is, like I could work for the Flyers. When you work for the team and it's your job, you get emotionally attached. You get to know the people involved. You know the players. You know the coach. You know the fan base. So you root for them. And when you're immersed in this job and you're with the team for month after month, you're traveling together, you're staying at the same hotels, you go to practice every day, you talk to these players. It could be like the biggest villain you could think of, but it turns out really great guy, and you want to see them succeed. And that's what it comes down to when you're working for a team. And now it just happens to be the Penguins in my case. But for me, when you're immersed in the team and the day-to-day life like that, it's easy to root for these guys because 99% of them are really good people.
So, like, going back to your early days, I'm sure Mike Lang was a huge influence on you when you were younger. And do you think if it wasn't for him that you would still be a broadcaster today?
Oh, no question. He's the reason. He's the reason that I got into this, that I was interested in this. I was such a big sports fan growing up. Maybe there would have been another avenue to get into sports, but the broadcasting specifically is traced back to him. It just so happened that everything came together. I'm 10 years old. The team wins the Stanley Cup. They have the best player and they have the best announcer. So I looked up to Mike Lang the same way I looked up to Mario Lemieux, that same adulation as a hero. And to this day, now he's a good friend and a guy I can call a colleague, and I can call him up or text him anytime. And if I have any questions or needed some career advice or anything, he's always there to provide it. So I'm always grateful for that. But yeah, there's no question that the whole career path is traced back to Mike Lang and how good he was, and how he just made it fun every night. Even the night where the Penguins didn't play well, or a season where they didn't play well, it was still worthwhile to tune in at 7 o'clock to hear his voice, to say it's a hockey night in Pittsburgh, and to just sit back and enjoy a hockey game. So I'm always appreciative of that. That's where the inspiration came from. I've never really thought about that. I wonder if they had just like an average announcer, or had cycled through a bunch of announcers. I wonder if I would have been as captivated to do this thing for a living. It certainly would have been I still would have realized it's a great job and it's really fun and you get in for free. And that would have been really appealing. But I think to be so dedicated to wanting a career in that profession in broadcasting, I'm pretty sure that Mike Lang is the sole reason.
Now, I did like a little bit of research. I know you joined the Penguins in 2017 on May 16th, so it's about in 3 days here. You'll have your 3-year anniversary with the Penguins as the play-by-play announcer, so congratulations on that. But when you got like the call to like offer you the job for that, was that like a oh hell yeah kind of moment, like this is what I've always wanted?
Well, I actually hadn't even thought of the anniversary like that, so thank you for breaking that news to me. I knew the date, I knew the range, but I hadn't really thought of it. It wasn't quite like that because I had an awesome job in New York at NHL Network, which I loved, and did that for 5 years. It was unexpected when they called, but it was a decision that had to be made because I love living in New York as much as I love Pittsburgh. I love New York as well. It's kind of been like a second home to me. I've gone back and forth. I lived on Long Island, then I lived 5 years in Manhattan, and I loved it. And had wonderful people that I worked with at NHL Network. It's obviously a prominent place to work if you want to be in the hockey industry. And I was able to do that and sit in that seat every night for 5 years and just talk hockey and talk to people I looked up to, whether it was a former player. I just like going through all the list of the players we interviewed, from Bobby Orr to Patrick Waugh to Joe Sakic, all of them, not just the Penguin people, but the list of hockey greats that I got to speak to with that job. It was amazing. And I did love living in New York. So I had to consider it, weigh all these options. But in the long run, I think it came down to getting to do play-by-play again, which is my first love, the reason I got into this business. So I think whether it was the Penguins or it was another really strong NHL team, I probably would have gone in that direction just because play-by-play is truly what I love to do. And as much as fun as it was hosting on a daily show, that's a different animal. It's kind of similar, where every day is like a game day. But the challenge of doing play-by-play, which I think is the hardest to do in all the sports, hockey play-by-play is really tough, and it's because it's so fast. I really missed that. So to be able to get back to doing that with regularity, and also the fact that it's a tremendous organization and it's my hometown and I still have my family here, my parents and grandmother here. So for all those factors, eventually it was like, well, someone's going to get this job. And if it's not me, it's going to be somebody else. So why not take it? And it's worked out really well.
So I've always wondered, like when you're trying to become a play-by-play announcer, when you go in for your first interview or for your, just your first chance at something, do they like have you audition for the part? Like, do they have you go over like a scene or something from a game that they recorded or anything?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, absolutely. I've been through various scenarios where they have asked for mock play-by-play and an audition, in addition to sending in a demo. When I applied for my first job in the minor leagues in Louisiana, it was, at the time, it was a CD. You sent a CD of like 5 minutes of your best play-by-play and had a bunch of clips and had goals and had some saves and some continuous action. So I sent that in and they liked it. And then they follow up and they ask questions like any other job interview. For other jobs, as you get to a certain level, people kind of know your work as it is. For my play-by-play, all they have to do is go to YouTube now at this stage and they can see it. But I have done that audition type scenario, and that's a bit nerve-wracking. You're just going in kind of cold and you're doing it off a monitor, and it's not as authentic. But if that's what they want and you want the job, then that's what you have to do. So it's like any job. You go through different steps, and you might have different phases and different people that you have to talk to, and the most important thing is you just have to deliver what you can bring uniquely to the job, and show your passion for the team, for the game, for the art of play-by-play. And there's different ways, multiple ways to do it. I think with like the studio shows like at NHL Network, I know they regularly had auditions for that. And that's a little bit different. It's more on camera. They want to see what you look like. They want to see your mannerisms, how you react to another panelist at the desk. So, there are auditions, just like in Hollywood when you're an actor auditioning for a part. But there's also some cases where people say that a demo clip is enough. And if you're one of the real big names in this industry, like if Doc Emmerich was going to apply for a job, I don't think they need to have him come in an audition or to get any of his work. I think that's pretty easy to research.
Yeah, no doubt. And to back up a little bit here, what was like your first, I guess, like foot in the door to get into like hockey media, like to start your career?
Yeah, it was that first one. Well, I guess you could say the real first thing is in college. And I talked to a lot of college students. We have a program with the Penguins that brings college broadcasting students to Penguin home games. And I tell them all, every time we have a student at the game, it's a lot of them are going into college. They might be high school seniors and they're trying to decide. It's one of the most frequently asked questions. What type of college should I look for? And it all comes down to the hands-on experience for me. Getting used to the flow of a hockey game, getting used to being on air, just like you guys are doing right now, getting used to being on camera. And at that impressionable age, that's really important. So that's a big thing. I think those college reps that I got at Bowling Green, that was really my first foray into any type of media and just an introduction to what it's like. And I remember being so nervous for doing like a 15-second sports update on a radio station that maybe 2 people were listening to on the college campus, maybe. But it was so nervous. I was so nervous because you have the microphone, you're in a studio, and your college classmates are listening, and you think it's a big deal back then because you're 19 years old, and of course it's not. It's just stupid nonsense, as in a lot of this stuff is that we do. But back then, those are the reps that are necessary. And then I think professionally, my first job that I mentioned, the one I mentioned, going down to Louisiana, working in minor league hockey, that was the first step as a professional. And the irony there is that those jobs in the minors broadcasting is like 10% at most of the job. You're doing sales, you're doing communications, you're doing game notes, you're doing PR, you're doing community relations, team services. You're wearing like 10 different hats. So the broadcasting is a smaller portion, but it just gives you, I always say, it's like getting your master's in hockey. You get one of those jobs out of college, and now you're learning everything, not just hockey. You're getting your master's in sports business and what it takes to have a successful sports franchise, which we did down in Louisiana at a minor league level. And now you get to the NHL and just everything's ramped up. Everything's on a bigger scale, but a lot of those fundamentals stay the same.
So, going back and talking about Mellon Arena, what are some of your favorite moments as a fan? Like before you started broadcasting, what were some of your favorite moments of games that you went to?
Games, there were so many of them. I never went to one of the cup games or years. The years I did during the regular season, I didn't have the privilege of getting one of those hard to find tickets to watch one of the cup final games against the North Stars or the Blackhawks. But the one that always will stand out to me as probably my absolute favorite, and actually was the first goal that I tweeted when I was looking back at the great goals. It just happens to be my favorite that I saw in person was 1997. It was Mario Lemieux's, what we thought his final home game, the 97 playoffs against the Flyers. Penguins were down 3-0 in the series. It was all but over, and they were going to win Game 4. And Lemieux, who we knew was going to retire, and there was no hope of a comeback. I mean, that was just never going to happen, we thought. So this was it. This was going to be it for Mario. And the final TV timeout, they start the tributes because in all likelihood, the team was going to go to Philadelphia and that was going to be it. And even if they did come back, you just want to make sure you got the proper send-off. So they with about 6 minutes left, they start the tributes and the ovations and the videos on the scoreboard. So the place is going crazy just in case this was the last time that we saw him. And with about a minute to go, Ian Moran gets a puck, backhands it quickly up ice. Didn't have a whole lot of room, which I mentioned on the tweet. And Lemieux has a breakaway. And the roar when he got the breakaway, when he got behind the defense, was so thunderous. And then he comes in and he scores against Garth Snow, who I would later work with at the Islanders. He was the general manager of the Islanders, ironically. And he scores 5-hole. I was in the first row of the E balcony right behind Garth Snow, or kind of above him. And that's the loudest I've ever heard any crowd. The building just exploded. And he had the big celebration, and the standing ovation came one after another. And I remember getting up to leave once that game had ended, and after he'd done the full lap curtain call as one of the stars, one of obviously the first star of the game. I remember standing up, and there was an older gentleman behind me, and you could clearly tell he had tears in his eyes. You know, the redness, and I was like, wow, this is even bigger than just your average sports moment. This is like an icon of Pittsburgh history that has probably played his last game in Pittsburgh. And for that year, it turned out it was, and we thought it was the goodbye. But as we know, he would have the comeback, which is totally fine too. I'll take that any day. But it doesn't change that one moment, because with all the emotions there, and I'm just like a high school kid at the time, and to see that amount of admiration and respect and just appreciation for one of the great athletes of all time, who's meant more to this city than I think any athlete to any city in sports history. That was just, it's such an emotional moment for me, and I'll just never forget it. I love the video. I love looking back on it. And I still have the ticket stub, and that will be always one. If I could ever build a time machine, that will be the place I go to sit right back in that first row E-balcony seat to relive just that pass, to see it just threaded through perfectly by Ian Moran. And I think it was, it might have been Chris Terrian, who was a Flyer defenseman, and he swung his stick. He almost got it, but it just got through, and I had such a great north-south view of it perfectly. And he got the pass, and he scored, and it was just storybook. It was Hollywood ending.
No doubt. Did you ever play hockey yourself or anything to kind of first strike an interest in it?
Oh yeah, I still play. Play to this day. I mean, I'm not playing right now, unfortunately, but I hope to soon when the rinks open back up. I played in high school, and again, it goes back to those Lemieux era Penguin teams. that got me interested. It's like, okay, I want to play this sport now. I remember going to my parents, and they were so supportive, and they got me those skating lessons, and they got me all the necessary equipment. And we bought street hockey things to play in the driveway or to play in the cul-de-sac outside. So yeah, that was right around that time. My story about playing hockey and getting into it at that time in Pittsburgh history is not that much different than a lot of stories of people my age. And now it's being repeated with the Crosby and Malkin Penguins, and kids who go to their mom and dad and they say, we want to play hockey, boys and girls. Girls hockey has really taken off, especially in this area. So yeah, my two brothers and I, we played a lot of hockey growing up, played a little bit in high school. I stopped playing once I started getting into just college, and you get involved in different things. And then I started working for these hockey teams, and now it's like, okay, you got access to equipment, you got access to ice all the time. There's some little groups that get going, office staff groups and leagues. And I got back into it when I was later in college, and then in Louisiana. And now I play as often as I can, as long as the body will hold up. And I enjoy getting out there. It's the best exercise. You couldn't have anything better. I really miss it for that reason, because you could go on the treadmill or the elliptical or the bike for days, and it just does not quite simulate the level of exercise and the exertion that hockey provides, those short bursts, the amount of chaotic movement that goes on. It's not just north-south. You have to contort your body in certain ways to make plays. They're unexpected plays. You got to be on balance. You got to be prepared for the puck to come to any part of your shooting angle. It's not going to be perfect. It's probably almost never going to be perfect. So those aspects, of course, with me, I'm terrible, so it's always imperfect. But it's a challenge and trying to get better, and most importantly, it's just fun and it's good exercise. So yeah, I still play. We had a Sunday group in Delmont that would get out and play pretty regularly before the pandemic hit. And I'd love to get back and do it again sometime here pretty soon.
Nice. Yeah, I don't admit like I'm not great at a lot of things, and skating's definitely not one of them. But I can play hockey like on my feet or rollerblading just fine. But once I get on like the ice, man, I'm just like a newborn deer, basically. No balance, like just falling everywhere. I can't imagine like how much like balance, like technique, like IQ that those players have to be able to perform like a day in and day out, basically. And I know like I'm not very good at like stopping. I can go real fast on skates, but stopping isn't like an option for me. I just run into something basically. But just the amount of like energy it takes to get going, and like then like being able to turn and stuff like that, that's just like amazing how interesting of like a sport like hockey is compared to like other sports.
Yeah, that's so true. It's the best athletes. It's so unique. You have extensions of your arms, meaning the stick. You have attachments to your feet, which are the skates and the blades. You're on this tiny, almost razor thin skate blade. You have these short bursts where hockey players, and they train this way. It's not a marathon. It's not like you're training for a long basketball game where you're playing the majority. It's a 30, 40-second shift, and then you get off and you rest, and you get back out there and you get full exertion and as much power as possible. And you have to train that way in these short sprints. And if you don't, then you're going to run out of gas pretty easily. So that's why I like it so much. I try to train that same way, whether it's on the bike, doing interval rides, or doing some sprints when I'm out running. So it's not like training for a marathon. It's completely different. That's why I say that you can't simulate it. There's nothing like it. I think I've stayed in pretty good shape during this, but it's not going to matter the first time I get back on the ice, because I'm still going to be completely gassed. And that's just the way hockey is. So yeah, I've got so much respect for these players, and it's just the hand-eye coordination, and you just marvel at some of the great players. I marvel at the guys who just played like junior hockey that made it to a fairly high level, or maybe played minor pro, like when I was in Louisiana and in the Central League, which is like AA hockey. So to think that there's another level, and then another level, and then maybe two more levels, and then there's Crosby, and then Lemieux and Gretzky, and at the top of the heap, those names, to think that they're that far in advance and that far ahead of some players that I think are incredible, some guys that have been on the ice that were maybe fourth liners at best, and they're just mesmerizing with their moves and their power and their skating ability. and they couldn't even cut it in the NHL. They really like we used to skate with Dan Bilesma, who was a former Penguin coach, and he was a grinder in his NHL days, had a very impressive career, and I was always amazed at how good he was on the ice. His shot, his stick handling, just how fast he was. He's big, and I'm thinking this guy, he was a grinder. He was a grinder and a checking line player, and he's just totally far and above all of us other beer league level guys who are just bozos out there. And there's a player who was by no means a 40 goal scorer in his NHL career, had a very good career, but not a big name scorer or a Hall of Famer. And to think that there are that many levels above where we're at with just even like a minor league player is it's incredible. It really is.
Yeah, so we'll start winding down the show a little bit, and at the end, we like to just ask some random questions of you to just to close down the show. So, what's something that's on your bucket list, like outside of hockey, that you want to do?
I always subscribe to the theory that if it's on your bucket list and you haven't done it, what are you waiting for? You got to do it, especially now if you can, if you're able to, because you have a lot of time. So if it's something that I really want to do, I should have already done it. One thing that comes to mind, there's two different types. There's the life bucket list, and then there's the sports bucket list. The sports one, I think probably number one would be going to a Super Bowl. I've always wanted to do that. I wanted to and this doesn't have to be the Steelers, just to see the pageantry and the enormity of such a huge event live. I think that's like my sports bucket list thing. And there are other things like I'd love to call a Penguin Stanley Cup win on home ice, which has never happened. Of course, they've won all 5 of theirs on the road. And that's more of like a career thing and a Penguin thing. That would be great too. But I think just personally, I want to go to a Super Bowl. And then for things like going back to like the life bucket list, I've got a lot of places where I want to travel to. That's a long list. Unfortunately, we had a trip to Thailand that was planned for this summer, which obviously has been canceled. And I've got so many other places. I love traveling, and I've got a long list of places that I want to go, whether it's Japan or London or South America or Africa. Been up to a few great foreign nations and been around Europe, and I've been to Beijing twice. Been to Australia, but that list is still long, and that. There are a lot. I'd love to go to Antarctica. I'd love to go to back to Alaska. I've been there a couple of times. So lots of places to go on the travel bucket list. That's for sure.
Okay. What's your favorite show on Netflix right now?
The favorite show on Netflix. So I've done everything like everybody else has done. I did Tiger King. I was in Joe Exotic's corner for like 5 or 10 minutes, and then that quickly went away. I watched Ozark. That was great. And now I hate to even admit it, but I've watched Too Hot to Handle. You've seen this show? It's like Jersey Shore on steroids. It's we all need escapism, and we all need a nice junk TV show every once in a while. So that one I've watched. And I've lost brain cells because of it, but still, it's entertainment, and we should have a little lightheartedness here in this serious time. Yeah, I love it's not Netflix, but I love the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls documentary on ESPN. A lot of people watch that. That's been really good. So I'm not a huge TV watcher. I'm definitely not a movie guy. I would shock you with the amount of movies or the names of movies that I've never seen. People go crazy when I give them some of the names I've never seen. But I just have other interests. I love music. I'd rather just sit and play the guitar and listen to music, or go to a concert when that's possible. Or I love cooking, and that's a different type of art form, so I think. So it's just a matter of having different interests. And but I have watched a lot of the regular shows that I think everybody's been watching.
So you've been to Pittsburgh and New York. What's your favorite place to eat in New York and your favorite place to eat in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, New York. I don't know how you narrow that down. It's just, that's the mecca of food and the culinary industry. And I am not a food snob by any means. I could go to the greasiest diner and cheesesteak place or whatever it is and just have the best meal or like a cheaper Chinese restaurant in New York's Chinatown, or the highest end 5-star Michelin star restaurant, and I could appreciate each just the same. I think probably my favorite cuisine would be Italian food. So in both cases, I'd probably go in New York. Carbone is one of the hardest restaurants to get a reservation to, and I've been lucky enough to get there a couple of times and just absolutely love it. It's kind of like an old school take on Italian with the checkered tablecloths and like the best version of everything that you could have, like the best Caesar salad, the best veal parm you could ever have. And then here in Pittsburgh, Italian food, you go up to the hill and you go to Alla Familia, and I know that's a big hockey staple. A lot of the visiting teams love to go there, and to me, that's as good as it gets in Pittsburgh with the different pastas and the dishes that they have. It's very New York level, and it's right here in our backyard. And I would love to go there right now. Actually, unfortunately, we can't go to many restaurants, but there's a lot of other good ones, and luckily some of the restaurants are doing the delivery or the pickup, and we've been trying to support some of those local businesses, especially in Lawrenceville. There's a bunch of them downtown and so forth. So I think it's really important to help out some of those businesses whenever you get a chance, because that's how they're trying to stay alive. For us, they're trying to make some money, and these are some great restaurants. The food scene in Pittsburgh is awesome right now. So hopefully we can get out of this, and those restaurants can open back up, and we can get back to enjoying some of those great places.
If you could do play-by-play for any other sports team or sport, what would it be?
My second favorite sport is baseball. So I guess I'd have to say the Pirates. I'm a lifelong Pirate fan. I've definitely been to more Pirate games than Penguin games, just because they're more new. They were and are more numerous, and the tickets were cheaper going to Three River Stadium. I remember you could get in for $1 in the 90s if you were 14 and under, and I pushed the envelope on that to like age 15 and 16 a little bit, I'll admit that. But even then, it was like $5 for general admission for an adult to get in. So I've been to way more Pirate games than Penguin games, because Penguin tickets were expensive back then and they were a little tougher to get. So yeah, I'd have to say probably the Pirates, because they're my favorite baseball team. They're my second favorite sports team behind the Penguins, and just a lifelong Pirate fan. I root for them even through a lot of these lean years. It's been tough, but I am still the biggest fan. I will always root for the logo and for the history. It's such a rich history, baseball here in Pittsburgh, and to be able to go to those games in Three River Stadium, and whether I was sitting all the way up at the top of the stadium or down by the dugout, it was always just magical. It was so great. I remember, if you remember, you guys might be too young, but they had the Allegheny Club at Three Rivers, and I found a little loophole in the Allegheny Club which opened at 4:30. The gates for everybody opened at 5 for the stadium. You could go into the Allegheny Club at 4:30 as batting practice was going on, go out a back door, and you could have the whole stadium to yourself for 30 minutes because you had the Allegheny Club pass. So I would do that. I would go into the Allegheny Club at 4:30 with my pass as a partial season ticket holder, and then go out the back door. I think it was legal. I don't think anybody ever stopped me or complained. If they did, I'm sorry. It doesn't matter now. The building's gone. But so I would sneak in, and for 30 minutes from 4:30 to 5, before the general public got in, you had the whole stadium to yourself. Maybe one or two other people were in there, but batting practice was going on, and like all my heroes are down there on the field at Three River Stadium, and I had the whole place to myself. I'd go out in the outfield. I'd just be picking up home run balls in batting practice, and it was magical. It was just like to be a kid and to be able to do that. It was cool, and there was like a conspiratorial aspect to it, because you had this kind of thing where you were sneaking in and you found this loophole and you were getting by, and you felt like you were James Bond, looking around the corner to see, okay, no one's looking. I'm gonna go out that back door now and go into the stadium. So that just gives you an idea of how much of a Pirate fan I am, and to this day, it also allows me to be a fan. Whereas in some way with the Penguins, that'll never happen, because I work for the team. It's my career. And you have to put the pom-poms down at some point, so to speak. But for the Pirates, I'm there. I'm sitting in the seats. I'm having a hot dog and maybe a Permane sandwich. and just having a good time, especially because it's baseball. The weather's usually nice, and it's just such a relaxing time. And then that allows me, and the Steelers too, those are the teams where I can just be a diehard fan and cheer as loud as anybody in the whole stadium.
I got one more for you. You said you like to play guitar and listen to music. What do you like to listen to and play, like, in your spare time?
The guitar is relatively new. I'm not very good, but I'm working on it. I certainly have a lot of time to do it here now. It's a challenge. It's like I think the impetus was to start something from scratch when you're at a later age in life or a later stage. So in my 30s, I'm thinking, like, what's something I can do where I have no background whatsoever, aside from playing the piano a little bit when I was a kid, but starting something completely from scratch. That's kind of hard to find something like that as you get older, because we've all done a lot of things. You've either played different sports or different activities, different languages you learn, things like that. We all have like some connection to something. But guitar, I thought was something that would be challenging. And I have to tell myself, don't get frustrated. Don't get frustrated. You're a beginner. It's not like you're at this stage of hockey or broadcasting or cooking or anything else like that. You're starting from scratch. You are a rookie, a complete beginner. So you have to block that out. I think that's good to avoid that frustration from setting in. And that's kind of a metaphor for life, I guess. But yeah, that's fun. I love trying to play a lot of the classic songs, a lot of Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and Red Hot Chili Peppers, and a lot of like the classic riffs. And there is a feeling like when you hit that note that somebody would recognize and that you recognize immediately as you're going through a class on a famous song, and it's that same riff and that same note and you hit it, that feeling, it's like a high. It's like, okay, that's the same chord that John Lennon played or Jimi Hendrix played, and now I'm playing it with the same formation of the fingers and the same strumming pattern. So that level of excitement, that's you can't duplicate that. I think that's just so cool that you can just by yourself, you're just sitting there strumming away. And okay, this sounds fairly close to what Paul McCartney or Billy Joel or whomever would play. So those things stand out with regard to playing it. And then for listening to music, I always go back to the 90s, and the two big genres of the 90s were hip hop and alternative rock. So lo and behold, those are my two favorite genres of music now. The 90s hip hop, everything is traced back to Jay-Z and Tupac and Biggie and all the great Dr. Dre and Snoop. So the 90s hip hop, and then the alternative rock, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, all those. It's a byproduct of the era in which I grew up.
I got one more just based off of what you just said, just because we've been doing these like brackets basically just for voting, like on our podcast and on our own personal accounts, just to like kind of get people like involved and stuff like that. But we just did like a Netflix bracket. But since you brought up music or hip hop, we were planning on doing like the greatest rapper of all time. In your opinion, who do you think is the greatest rapper of all time?
It's got to be Jay-Z, because he says so in many of his songs. So, but no, my personal favorite is Jay-Z. He's just the best. But there's so many. And now I like getting back into some of the old school, like really old school stuff, like in the 80s and Run DMC and LL Cool J and the Beastie Boys. And that's kind of an untapped era of hip hop, because it was just really getting going. And then now you get in the 90s and it takes off. So for me, Jay-Z is always going to be number one. Anytime I need any type of like pump up music, some people like heavy rock or even metal. When it comes to hip hop, when it comes to music and like getting pumped up. But for me, it's hip hop, and it's something to do with the confidence and the bravado. And I just love it. It's the beat and everything. And I just really enjoy it. So listening to the various stations and going back and there's a lot of good stuff that's out there now too, and I try to keep up with Drake and some of the other artists who are out there, Travis Scott and other guys. But it's for me, it all goes back to like that 90s era. I'm in high school and early college, and for me, Jay-Z is always going to be number one.
You got anything else?
I think that's it.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, Steve. Thanks for spending some time with us today, letting us get to know you and let our listeners get to know you a little bit.
Yep. Thanks. We appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Really fun chatting with you. Keep up the good work, and appreciate it. Stay safe. Hope everybody out there is doing the same thing, hanging in there, and hopefully we'll be back to a rink sometime very soon.
Yep. Hope so. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. If you're listening to the podcast, it would mean the world to us if you gave us a rate and review. Subscribe to the podcast as well, so you're first to know when we release new episodes. Be sure to download the podcast to help us out. If you're watching the podcast on YouTube, the full-length podcast is in the description. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe as well. Check us out on all of our social media. Our Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat are all official SSOL. Again, that is OFFICIALSSOL. That is on Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. And you can find us at Secret Spice of Life on Facebook. Don't forget to check out our website and blog, new blog every Wednesday, and potentially some bonus blogs throughout each week. Be sure to check out our Patreon as well, because for 2019 and every year coming, we are going to monetize our Patreon for charity. So anything that is donated to our charity tier on there will be donated to a charity of your choosing or our choosing by the end of the year or every 6 months or so. But yeah, make sure to donate to that to give back to other people. And as always, have a positive and productive day.
Welcome to some shit that's considered legendary.